Good afternoon, everyone. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for being here and to welcome you to our Earth Day seminar, where we will uncover various topics linked to Mother Earth and environment. Every year on April 22nd, Earth Day marks the anniversary of the birth of a modern environment movement in 1970. Today, more than 1 million people in over 190 countries participate in actions and projects to mark Earth Day, driving positive action for our planet. Here at Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture, we collaborate with our partners to mark Earth Day by presenting best practices and solutions in nature and by celebrating Earth Day throughout this seminar. Now, we will begin the seminar with our first topic, the Saudi and Middle East Green Initiatives, presented by Dr. Usama Faqiha, the Deputy Minister for Environment and Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Because many of our attendees are English speakers, so please, if you excuse me, I will deliver my speech in English. In the beginning, I would like to welcome all the guests who are joining us here in presence or virtually through virtual communication channels. We thank you very much for being with us today, and Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. As you know, we are gathering here to celebrate Earth Day, which aims to remind us of the important connection between our human society's existence, sustainability, and the preservation of the natural environment of our planet Earth. In the past, as you know, the connection between human communities and the environment were direct. The person eats what he fishes or what he farms. He will drink the water from the well that he has dug or from a lake he lives on. So human communities were very appreciative of the environment, can see firsthand the environmental services, how they are benefiting from it, and they has been by nature protective of the environment. These types of persons will not pollute the well that he is drinking from every day. In the last 200 years, and with the Industrial Revolution and the intervention of industrial processes in our life, in my opinion, two major phenomena occurred. The first one is that the gradual dislink between the human and the level of the individuals and communities and the production process. Now, currently, I don't need to go to the farm and pick the fruits myself or pick up the corn. I go to the grocery store, to the supermarket, or to the mall to get all what I need. This created really a false sense of independence from environment. Meanwhile, actually, the bread that I take from the grocery is grown in a farm that is really depends on the soil and the fertility. The meat that I consume is coming from a fish, either farmed or harvested from the sea or from the lake. And all the other materials that I use actually came from natural sources. The second thing that has been created is really the waste. The ease, the convenience that the modern human beings living in the urban cities or the urban forest, I would call it, really created a sense of abundance, the availability, and ease of access. So really, we take more than we need, and then actually we generate more waste. The production and the interaction with environment happen away from my direct experience and interaction as a human being. Somebody else is farming the farm, or there is some mining company that extracting some minerals, and a factory there that really produce for me. That generated more consumption of natural resources, more loss in the value chain, and also more waste at the consumer level. This is called the urbanization phenomenon. And the most important thing now we have to do as human community is really responsible consumption and responsible production. The other thing that we need to do as human beings is really to observe environment in our daily life. In the water I drink, in the milk, when I drink the milk, I have to realize how many liters of water has been consumed to generate this milk. So really we have to do that exercise. We have to be mindful for our behavior. And this is what this Earth Day is all about. It's not really about switching the light 1 hour in one day. It's about stopping and thinking and re-establishing our connection with the environment and our appreciation of the environment. The environmental economics, which there are so many studies of it now, estimate the value of ecological services that we take for free now is almost double the global GDP. The global GDP is now stands around $75 trillion. And the environment actually, what we were able to calculate, and I cannot really claim that now we are able to inventory all of the spectrum of ecological services, but at least those services that the economists were able to calculate and estimate the value, and that estimated is biased. It's our actually assessment or our assigned value to it, not necessarily is the true value. It stands now at double the global GDP. That's a huge number. That's a huge number. So in a world now is driven by economic data every day. So this is another really way of appreciating how valuable the earth is providing for us. Almost all our food sources are coming from natural resources, either terrestrial or marine. All our material that we consume really go back to natural resources, the water, the pharmaceuticals. So really, despite the sense of pride we take as human in the technological achievements we have reached in this 21st century, we have to be humbled and realize that we still today as much reliant as the environment as we used to be 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Even might be more dependent. One more thing now, our ability to impact our environment has amplified significantly. Arabia is characterized by the camel caravans. The Arabian traders used to really march the Arabian deserts, maybe in 100 camels caravan, or mere going to Syria to get some goods, or to Yemen to get some goods. The environmental impact of this caravan is nothing compared to one 4x4 SUV, really running around the desert. And actually this caravan actually might be actually moving seeds and plants and maybe actually fertilizing the ground. It might even have a positive impact. What I'm trying to say now is that one person could have the environmental impact of his behavior exceeding maybe 1,000 persons a few hundred years ago. We had to be mindful of that. While we have fun, we have to realize that we are also having an impact, or when we are consuming, we are having impact. So in this Earth Day, we have to be mindful of really the benefits of planet Earth to human communities and all species, but including human communities. And also, we have to be mindful of our impact, individually or collectively. In Saudi Arabia, Vision 2030 assigned a high priority to environment. Last Environmental Week in March marked the announcement of two historical initiatives, the Saudi Green Initiatives, to plant 10 billion trees over the next few decades, which is even more challenging considering the aridity of the region. And the second one, and there is many other initiatives under the Saudi Green Initiative, not only planting trees, but the planting trees is the flagship, but there are so many other initiatives covering so many other aspects like marine protection, biodiversity protection, waste recycling and circular economy and others. But really the flagship initiative is the 10 billion trees. And the second initiative is the Middle East initiative to the Green Middle East to plant 50 billion trees in the region in collaboration with our regional and international partners. I would like to mark that although those initiatives came last week, they did not came out of vacuum. They came as really another link in a chain of decisions that highlight the importance assigned to environment by Vision 2030. This journey started back in 2016 with the creation of the first environmental ministry, Ministry of Environment, Water and Culture, in May 2016, followed by the basically issuing the National Environmental Strategy, followed by the complete restructuring of the environmental sector, resulting in the creation of 5 national environmental centers. Each really has been entrusted with a national priority, national environmental priority, the National Center for Combating Desertification, the National Center for Waste Management, the National Center for Environmental Compliance, the National Center for Wildlife Development, and the National Center for Meteorology. Also, the creation of National Environmental Fund, the largest in the region, has been also been quietly approved and established. Also, the creation of the National Environmental Police, known as the Special Forces for Environment within the Ministry of Interior. This, in addition to 65 initiatives costing around 52 billion riyals, environmental initiatives covering various aspects. This does not include the investment outlook for the waste recycling. That is more than double that number as well. So really, the focus of Saudi Arabia did not start by the Saudi Green Initiative or the Middle East Green Initiative, but actually it has really reached a major milestone with that announcement. But the focus has started a few years ago with the leadership of the custodian of the two Holy Monks and mosque and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Of course, there were many other announcements, like the creation of NEOM and the line and all this concept of forward-looking, a very progressive, environmentally friendly city, smart city, and I'm sure that Dr. Paul Marshall will shed more light in his presentation about the very futuristic and environmentally conscious way the city is designed, and the announcement of the Giga project, the Red Sea and the Amala, and announcement of the renewable energy outlook, moving from less than 1% of renewable energy today in our energy mix to more than 50% by 2030 of renewable energy, and the green hydrogen, and many others initiatives that I cannot really recall from my memory, but it all point to one thing, which is really the high priority the government of Saudi Arabia assigned to environment. Last year, Saudi Arabia had the privilege to head the meetings of G20 meetings in 2020. For the first time in G20 history, we have established an environmental working group. For those of you who are not familiar with the G20 process. G20, since it was established, it has assigned a track, a working group for climate and energy only. And then the Japanese presidency put climate, energy, and environment together. And then we said, by the way, environment, although climate change is a major issue, but climate is much more than that. There is so many other issues than the climate change, although the climate change is really an important impact, but there are impacts happening today in terms of the degradation of marine habitats, terrestrial habitat, loss of biodiversity, others. So Saudi Arabia have established the first environmental track in G20, and now actually the Italian presidency this year have actually continued the environmental track. Three major things that has happened into that. Actually, a ministerial environmental communique was issued in November covering so many aspects about biodiversity, about marine protection, about human-wildlife interaction, and now we know we have received a very important and hard lesson about the importance to be very respectful when we deal with wildlife through the COVID-19, which we all know that there is a high possibility of linkages between wildlife-human interaction that yielded this. And also we covered that in our discussion, plus covering many other aspects about biodiversity, about terrestrial habitats, about coral reef and marine habitats, about illegal fishing, about deforestation, about sustainable production chains, about many other issues. Those of you who did not read the ministerial communique, please I advise you to go back and read the environmental minister communique, because it talks about climate change, but it talks about so many other issues as well as climate change that may not have received the same level of attention by the global media or the global policy making. Also, Saudi Arabia has launched two global initiatives under the G20. The G20 initiative to reduce land degradation and increase conservation of terrestrial habitats. According to WWF Living Planet Index and their report, the Living Planet issued in 2018, as I recall, around 60% of biodiversity loss is associated with the loss of habitats and degradation. And around between 5 to 10% now is associated to climate change, but that will amplify moving forward. I have to also cite another number that came in that report, is that in the last few decades, we have lost around 60% of biodiversity in this planet Earth. That's a huge loss in a very short time period associated with our way of life, our current way of life. So again, this Earth Day is another way to remind us that we have to rethink what we do and maybe take some drastic measures. The second initiative was the initiative to create a platform to accelerate research and development of coral reef. Coral reef, although occupy less than 0.% of the total ocean area, it is home to around 25% of ocean biodiversity. That's a very high density of biodiversity in a certain habitat. It's also very important for shoreline protection and for ecotourism. That's an increasing trend, and I think here in Saudi Arabia, ecotourism is really taking a very positive trend to increase, and also it's very important to fisheries and other social benefits. And they are under tremendous stress. So really this global platform, which will be now housed in KAUST, is another important global initiative that has been endorsed by G20 countries, and it's open to all countries in the world to participate. These and others are just examples of how really Saudi government is walking the talk. It's not just about really giving environmental attention really, I would say, really what I'm saying is really the care for environment is really true and is reflected in so many government actions and so many initiatives. On the social dimension, we are really seeing a huge, really interest in environment. We used to have one NGO, Saudi NGO for environment. Now we have 20. We have we call it the Green League, Rabit al-Khadra. When the Ministry of Environment was established, there was about 5 or 6 of them. Now we have about 200 Green Leagues. The number of national parks when the ministry was established was around 19. Now it exceeds 300 national parks. The total area of national parks were around 48,000. Now they are close to 2 million hectares. The protected areas were around 4.3% of the total area in Saudi Arabia. Now they are close to 16%. And His Royal Highness Crown Prince announced last March that this percentage is being targeted to increase really with the aspiration to reach 30%. So really, and this and many other indicators that I cannot talk about it in these few minutes, that really give us an indication of how much attention we are having. In waste recycling, now currently we have a 5% diversion from landfills. Our target is to reach 94% diversion from landfills by 2035 and 100% diversion from landfills in Riyadh City by 2025. Very ambitious targets that require a lot of work. Now, this whole importance of environment put higher responsibilities on everybody, but especially higher responsibility on us environmental professionals. Really, the whole world is now looking to you for leadership. I think we are seeing now an awareness, a general global awareness of the importance of environment, and now really the environmental professionals are leading the way and really now changing the lifestyle of all people back to really more harmonization with nature and more humbleness in dealing with nature. And this put a huge responsibility on us professionals, environmental professionals, not only as individuals but as organizations and entities that are related to environment. And I think here, I look in the room, I see many of my colleagues who are really dealing with environment in various aspects. I'm very glad to see you here. I think we need more of these meetings and gatherings because really there is a lot in the future depends on the collective wisdom of the environmental professionals and the world as a whole. Thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you for the informative speech, Dr. Osama. Please welcome Dr. Paul Marshall, Head Nature Region at NEOM, who will present with an overview of the line and NEOM's strong commitment to nature conservation.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, thank you very much to Dr. Osama and the Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture for organising this seminar on such an important day. Earth Day is a day for us to reflect, but of course it's supposed to be much more than a day. It's supposed to challenge us to think differently about our relationship with planet Earth. I'm here to share with you the plans we have for NEOM, which is now hopefully known by many people, everybody in the room of course, but those also who are listening online. It's widely known to be the world's most ambitious project. It's often characterised as a development project, but it's much more than that. NEOM stands for the new future, and the new future needs to be very different from the past, and especially in the way we relate to our planet. In this regard, NEOM aims to craft an entirely new relationship between society and nature. We're doing that through a very ambitious approach, a radical approach to the way we develop, design and build cities. Is it still showing?
We just want to share it in Webex. So
Sure.
we can talk.
So with NEOM, we've recognised that there's often assumed a trade-off between progress and protecting the environment. This is a trade-off that is the result of a legacy of decisions, of institutions that are very hard to change. It's our effort, our responsibility, our shared responsibility to challenge this. It's not showing, it's not.
خلاص الحين شوفوا شيرت صح؟ in Webex. That's it.
Okay. So with NEOM we have a chance to not just do it differently, but also help the world do it differently, to really accelerate this transition to a more harmonious relationship between people and planet. So let me start with the context that we're all too familiar with. What we now know is that humanity has changed planet Earth. Our fingerprint, and in fact our footprint, is all over nature. And this footprint takes many forms that are illustrated by this very well-known graph now. All of the signals of the human presence on the planet have been increasing exponentially and in concert to create an unprecedented pressure on the planet. And this manifests in many ways. We've heard about many of them already from Dr. Osama. Across all of the key biomes, air, land and sea, whether it's pollution and climate change, massive biodiversity loss and desertification, or in the coral reefs that we hold so precious here in this part of the world for the sea environment, overfishing and loss of corals from coral bleaching. And the numbers are stark. 300 to 400 million tonnes of waste, including toxic sludge, is disposed of into the oceans every year by humanity's activities. 75% of the Earth landscape has been obviously altered by humans. And we've lost over 50% of coral cover across the entire globe. These are just some of the statistics that science now puts squarely in front of us as evidence of our effect on nature. But it's not just about the planet out there, it's not just about nature, it's about our very existence. This planet is not just our home, it's actually our life support system. And both our economies and our societies are starting to see very palpably the effects of a degraded planet that has been damaged at the hands of our progress. Even something as close to home now as the COVID pandemic has its roots in our mistreatment of nature. And if you can get to pure hard numbers, $24 trillion of economic opportunity are lost every year because of the degraded state of our planet. It's quite clear that our planet needs something special from us now. It needs big, bold ideas. It needs strong visionary leadership. It needs an unwavering commitment, and it needs us to really rethink what conservation is. Conservation can't be the thing you do with the bit of land that you don't know what to build on. Conservation has to be much more central and much more active. We see this as the opportunity for NEOM to make a contribution on behalf of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, not just to our little corner of the world, but for the entire planet. And so turning to NEOM as a project now, as an enterprise, as a flagship of Vision 2030 in the Kingdom. This is our vision for NEOM. It's a land of the future where the greatest minds and the best talents are empowered to embody pioneering ideas and exceed boundaries in a world inspired by imagination. But all of this in harmony with nature. This might seem impossible, but when I show you the concept for the main development intent for NEOM, you'll see how radical thinking can make this possible. So NEOM describes itself as an accelerator of human progress. And again, in many people's minds, progress normally means at the expense of the environment. In NEOM, that is not the case. We're focusing not just on economic opportunity, but also on creating exceptional livability for the people who live and call NEOM home, and for all the visitors who come to visit. Business is central, but we believe that businesses will thrive, and business resilience depends on a respect for nature and a valuation and an internalisation of the importance of natural capital. And in all of this, creating an incredible conservation legacy for the future. NEOM's big, NEOM's complex. The entirety of NEOM is 26,000 square kilometres. Our ambition is to create an unrivalled livability for over 1 million residents who will call NEOM home. And there's many aspects to the enterprise, many things that make NEOM unique. The location is significant. It's in the northwest of Saudi Arabia. We have an opportunity to design and build without the legacy of industrial development. We can build from the ground up. And we're going to have our own system of law that will enable things to move quickly, but while protecting nature as a paramount objective of our legal system. The economy will be diversified, and what you'll see here is of this development project, a key pillar is to make sure we do it in harmony with nature. It's got the strong support of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia going all the way to the top, with His Royal Highness the Crown Prince being our strongest champion. It's the introduction of the line that was announced very recently by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince that is the centrepiece of the commitment of NEOM, not just to deliver this new future, but to do it in a way that protects nature in a way that has not been seen before. In the presentation of the line to the world, His Royal Highness made it clear that it's an amazing city, an incredible concept, but one of its key virtues is that it protects 95% of NEOM's natural environment. With this, we want to use NEOM as a way of pivoting the world's relationship with the environment and be the epicentre of the environmental revolution. It's very appropriate that we're here talking about this because it's our partnership with with the Kingdom's Ministry of Environment that will make this so important, with NEOM being a project of the Kingdom, for the Kingdom, as well as the rest of the world.
Contemporary cities couldn't cope with growth. The contemporary city needs a full redesign. What if we removed cars? What if we got rid of streets? What if we innovated in the public space? What if we built around nature instead of over it? What if everything you needed was always a 5-minute walk away? What if invisible technology generates carefree and open urban space? What if sustainability was not a goal, but a given? What if we replaced outdated urban services with new services driven by artificial intelligence? What if we built the Line, a 170-kilometer revolution in urban living, protecting the Earth's most stunning nature while creating unmatched livability, a home to all of us. Welcome to the Line. NEOM.
So many of you will have seen the launch of the line captured here, and you'll see how important the line is as a concept for everything that NEOM is trying to do. And by the announcement of the line as the central character of what NEOM will become, we've immediately identified the line and defined it by also what the line isn't. which is 95% of NEOM that will be undeveloped for the protection of nature. And this is our way of ensuring that NEOM becomes the bank of natural capital that will enable our development ambitions to be realised in a way that is done in harmony with nature, but also will be enduring. So a quick fly through of the beauty of NEOM to let you know why I'm so excited about this opportunity, because not only is this important as a commitment to the world, but the landscape itself of NEOM is breathtaking, and the opportunity to protect this for the whole world is a great honour. So we have incredible range of environments, from soaring mountains, expansive deserts, beautiful coastline and islands. And these are home to very special habitats and species, including many species that are listed as endangered or vulnerable. Our coral reefs are spectacular, they're thriving, and some of the most healthy and resilient on the planet in relation to climate change. We have the most incredible deserts. Many of you will be familiar with this expansive band of red desert that goes through the northwest of this part of the world. Incredible history and cultural history, incredible wildlife. And the mountains are amazing. We have snow in winter in the middle of the desert, an incredible landscape, and perhaps some of the most important habitat left in the world for very rare Arabian desert species. So as we move forward with this incredibly ambitious project that has so much profile because of its development aspirations, we also are moving forward with our program of nature conservation. Our program to care for nature is underscored by 5 core principles. We start with understanding. We know that knowledge is power. So we intend to accumulate as much information we can about the assets that we have, our natural assets, and that will become the foundations, the science foundations for our decision making. We start with a commitment to protect. So as we go about developing, even though it will be only in 5% of NEOM, even those enterprises will be done in a way that minimises the environmental footprint and is net positive for biodiversity and climate. We have an opportunity to enhance. The landscape, while free from industrial legacy, has not been free from the effect of humans. There's been hundreds of years of use of the area, including overgrazing, overfishing and harvesting of trees. These will all be stopped, and we'll be reversing this through an ambitious program of restoration that I'll share a little bit about momentarily. Sustainability is built into our DNA. Our cities will be designed and built around the principles of circular economy, so that actually the cities themselves, as I said, will be net positive contributions through their life to both biodiversity and climate. And finally, recognise this isn't just for us, this isn't even just for the kingdom, this is for the world. So we want to share our learnings and accelerate the transition to a more harmonious relationship with nature for the whole world. So these pillars give rise to these principles give rise to 3 principles that are driving our environment strategy and our nature region strategy. And these are nature conservation, sustainable development, and environmental quality. These are the foundations for programs we are designing now, and we're getting sign-off shortly, that will take all of this forward into operational programs. The thing I want to share now that is particularly exciting and relevant to today is the Nature Conservation Program, which is our program to develop a network of protected areas across 95% of NEOM that covers land and sea, that locks in these aspirations to not just protect, but restore. And we want to go beyond the traditional approaches to conservation. We want to do that, but more. And we have a chance to take conservation to a whole new level through ambitious projects that will regenerate the landscape and seascape of NEOM, but create momentum towards planetary regeneration and the restoration of our relationship with nature. We will be taking bold measures to not just minimise our climate footprint, but actually to repair climate. Through a combination of mechanical and biological sequestration, we want to absorb more than we emit in the course of NEOM's life. On land, we have exciting opportunities to do the world's biggest rewilding program. NEOM is still an incredibly healthy and resilient landscape, but the big animals are missing. We want to bring them back through partnerships with our colleagues the Ministry of Environment. And we want to play a leading role in efforts to reverse desertification. We know that much of NEOM used to be greener than it is now, particularly on our coastal plains where aquifers have been over-obstructed and the flows of groundwater have stopped. We know there used to be oases across this coastal plain that was one of the most important routes for Hajj, where people used to travel these routes knowing there was reliable water and vegetation. They are not there anymore. We want to bring them back. And in the ocean, we know we can do incredible things to accelerate the adaptation of our coral reefs to climate change through the world's most ambitious coral restoration program. But beyond corals, as critical as they are for habitat, we know we can do much more for the rest of the ocean's environment through restoring abundance. We know that the oceans, the sea of NEOM is beautiful, the ocean is incredibly clean and healthy, but it's been overfished. We want to accelerate the return of fish to NEOM as a cornerstone of the revitalisation of this incredibly rich environment. So that's my quick overview of our plans for NEOM, our commitments that we hope will be inspirational for the world, but also capture the true deep ambition and commitment of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to lead the world in a transition that we have to make to a more harmonious relationship with nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, for the wonderful presentation and nice video. Now we will proceed with the lead scientist at UNCCD, Dr. Haroon Or, who will take the floor forward from Germany and provide us with an overview of combating desertification and drought.
Hello, Doctor.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I cannot see any controls in the Cisco WebEx. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We are ready in your presentation now. Do you hear me? Hello, Doctor.
Okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this. I will turn this off. Yes, I hear you, but I have no access to the PowerPoint presentation, and I cannot see the PowerPoint. Ah, now I can see it. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Baron Moore, and I'm the lead scientist for the UNPCD, and I will share a short presentation on combating desertification and drought. Next slide, please. How important is land to the Sustainable Development Goals? Next slide, please. I will be moving through this PowerPoint presentation very quickly, so please be ready to move the slides. The Planet Sustainable Development Goals underpin all the other objectives that we are trying to pursue. Climate, water, land are the foundation for everything else. Next slide, please. And land land is the foundation even of those other SDGs that support the entire SDG process. Next slide, please. Land is the primary resource of natural capital, which you heard Paul Marshall mention in his presentation. So what do we mean by this? Next slide, please. Natural capital are the resources, in this case, that flow from land and the ecosystem service that capital that provide benefit, whether it's business, society, all people. Next slide, please. When land is degraded, we lose natural capital, and thus we lose the benefits that land and nature contribute to people. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by desertification? Well, you can see at the bottom of this slide the definition, which is officially provided in the core convention text of the UNCCD. And essentially, desertification means land degradation in dry lands. Next slide, please. So where are the dry lands? Well, where you are right now, if you're physically watching this in Saudi Arabia, you're in the hyper-arid segment of the dry lands of the world. But everything that is not green or gray, this slide, are the hot dry lands, and the gray color are the cold dry lands. Next slide, please. So now, since I'm a professor, I have to ask you a question. Next slide, please. What is land degradation? Next slide, please. So I'll give you a moment to think about this, but I'll ask the organizer to advance now to the next slide. Only one on this list is land degradation. Next slide, please. And I make this point because even the UNCCD, in its past approaches to trying to communicate to the world desertification and land degradation, have mistakenly used these images to depict desertification. But they're not desertification. These are natural processes that you see in these images of spreading desert and bare soil surfaces. Why do I mention this? When we think about forests and deforestation, we naturally assume that forests are natural ecosystems. But frequently, we don't think of deserts as natural ecosystems, but they are. Next slide, please. These are photographs of desertification and land degradation. Next slide, please. And then the next slide. I won't go through the list, but there are many processes that contribute to land degradation and desertification. Next slide, please. So global land degradation is reported in the Sustainable Development Goal process under the goal, Life on Land, target 15.3, in particular, the indicator 15.3.1, which is the proportion of land that is degraded over total land area. Next slide, please. And this next slide will show you what this looks like on a map after countries reported this for the first time in 2019. What this tells you is that 1 in 5 hectares that were put to use, in other words, natural areas that were put to human use, are no longer usable for their original intended purposes. That's not a good track record, and the process is accelerating. Next slide, please. This is what it looks like on a regional basis. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to the world? Next slide, please. It means huge losses, $6 trillion US per year, 10% of the annual global gross product. Next slide, please. And from a number of assessments, it is very clear it impacts a lot of people, and doing something about it will require more than what we're doing today because there will be more people demanding. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through these quickly, so please move the slides quickly. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Screen, the slide is not moving. We're talking about productivity of land. Next slide, please. And we're talking about 3.2 billion people affected. Next slide, please. Again, please go through these quickly. 1 million species are threatened by extinction because of the impacts. Next slide, please. And there is a link to climate because land both is the primary sink for carbon, but is contributing 1/4 of the emissions that are going into the atmosphere. Next slide, please. In this slide, the focus here is about where we're headed, because as population grows and aridity increases, more people will be affected by not just land degradation, but desertification, because areas that today are not dry lands will become dry lands in the next 2-3 decades. Next slide, please. So, is it all about how we farm and how we graze land, or is it possible to actually export land degradation? Next slide, please. What we eat, what we wear, what we feed our animals, all contributes to the conversion of land for human use. And we're talking about 70 to 75% of the planet has been transformed from its natural state. It doesn't leave us a lot of room for future maneuvering. Next slide, please. And this is a stark visualization of what this looks like if you add this up around the world. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like on a given day. These arrows change. But if we look at the flow of displaced land, there's the dependence that countries have on the land of other countries to take care of internal consumption, it's striking. It's a very powerful story. And it's not the story we've been telling for decades. It's about all of us. It's not simply about the small farmer or small pastoralist in Africa or in Asia. It's about everyone and what we're doing at our dinner table. Next slide, please. And this has been recognized in Saudi Arabia through the campaign for sustainable consumption of food during Ramadan. Next slide, please. And now we have to think about what we're going to do about this. And we need to do it, and we need to do it now. Next slide, please. So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that the old model failed. The old model was fix land degradation where we see it through restoration, prevent it where we could conserve, and sustainably manage where we are already using land. But we've never keeping up. We're not keeping up with new land degradation. Unlike with carbon in the atmosphere and temperature change, we don't project land degradation today. We are still operating on what we see rather than what we forecast. And we're certainly not optimizing what we do where to reduce the impact of land degradation. Or as Paul Marshall said a moment ago, building around nature. In other words, allowing nature be where it needs to be, and then also farming where we should be farming, energy where we should be producing energy, etc. We need to be optimizing the land that we have. Next slide, please. This concept is called land degradation neutrality. It's considered a no net loss approach. It's about ensuring that if we're going to fix land here, we're considering all other land of that same ecosystem type to make sure we're doing it in exactly the right place, because we have limited resources. We can't fix everything simultaneously. More importantly, we can't conserve everything simultaneously. So we need to optimize what we're doing. Next slide, please. In other words, it's no longer a question of management. We're good at that. We know how to sustainably manage land. We know how to restore land. What we don't know is how to make integrated land use planning decisions where conservation, agriculture, municipal are considered simultaneously, always, for all lands. Next slide, please. And the story here is that prevention is better than the cure. It's much harder to repair something that has been lost than it is to avoid degradation where it has not yet been lost. So we start there with avoid, but we've got to do all three levels of this hierarchy if we're going to succeed. Next slide, please. Land degradation neutrality, therefore, is about doing the right things in the right places at the right scale, everywhere, all the time. Next slide, please. And countries have lined up to support this. There are now 127 countries pursuing LDN targets. Next slide, please. And as Dr. Osama mentioned, the most powerful countries in the world economically, the G20, have embraced the need to address conservation, sustainable land management, and restoration in a continuum, and you can see underlined, to achieve a 50% reduction of degraded land by 2040. In other words, these countries are not presenting new commitments. They're suggesting we need to invest in turning our commitments into action. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this is being pursued in almost every country in the world in some form or another. The Green Saudi Initiative, Dr. Osama just explained, is a major contribution to these targets, to these ambitions that we're talking about. Next slide, please. And to pursue this in a regional approach, to bring countries together in a common approach, puts us in the position to balance consumption and resource use, or decouple these, so that we have less and less of that pressure on land. Next slide, please. I've also been asked to give a few words about drought, because it is part of the name of the convention, and you might want to think of it as the thing that drives the system over the edge. Land degradation is an ongoing process and leads eventually to families having difficulty in terms of income, maybe migration, or other decisions. But drought hits in episodic events and can really spark change because of the harm that it can cause in the system. And we've always been reactionary in the past, until recent years, where countries came together and recognized that we need to be proactive, that we need to implement plans associated with drought, and to link those plans to land. Next slide, please. So what do I mean by linking them? Next slide, please. Linking these to land. Well, first, in terms of how big is the issue for drought, it's huge. And this slide would look totally different today. This was in 2016. But listen to the news about what's happening in the Western United States and Western Canada, and you will recognize that these colors change through time. Next slide, please. And you'll notice if you zoom in with your eyes on Saudi Arabia, the frequency of droughts are increasing, as was reported by IPCC, and even in the driest areas, we're having a harder time with drought than even we've had in the past. Next slide, please. And what I was trying to get at is that we think of drought as a problem of atmosphere, of rainfall. But the reality is we can have rainfall that does not change at all through time. But we can have land degradation that reduces the water holding capacity of our soils. And we can suddenly have water scarcity even with no change in our rainfall patterns. We can also do this by planting the wrong crops. If we plant thirsty crops, we demand more water. This is true in all sectors, but very, very strong in agriculture, which is the largest consumer of water of all sectors. Next slide, please. Thank you. This presentation was designed to give you a sense of what the world is doing to address desertification and drought. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Paroon. Allow me to introduce Ms. Itaf Shahida, Program Management Officer at UNEP, who will walk us throughout the topic of environmental challenge to restore the earth.
السلام عليكم مبارك عليكم الشهر وكل عام وانتم بخير. My name is Itraf Shahadi. I am from the regional office for West Asia, for UNEP West Asia, based in Manama, Bahrain. And we have our Saudi Arabian office as well, colleague Mamadou Kane, sitting with us today as well. So I've been asked today to present on the environmental challenges that the world is facing. And I thought that what better time to do this except on Earth Day today, as we celebrate Earth Day. And I think we've all heard the messages today that we are, sorry, is this, no, this is not mine, sorry. I mean, you know. That's mine, yes, thank you. Sorry, I could have given you a presentation at that time, but yes. So I think it's really, really important that we understand that a lot of the messages that we've been hearing today is really about how we transform our relationship with nature. And actually, instead of transforming nature itself, but transforming that relationship. So do I just press enter? That one, yeah, okay. So what we know today is that we are facing a global climate emergency, a biodiversity crisis, and of course, pervasive toxic pollution. And what we have seen over the past year is a lot of unprecedented messages that are coming from the scientific community that is actually highlighting and stressing the fact that we are putting extreme pressures on nature. In the last UNEP emissions gap report that came out actually end of last year, it indicated that we are heading towards at least a 3 degrees temperature rise in this century. And the IPBES report has recently sounded the alarm over the rapid decline of biodiversity and what that means for Agenda 2030 and for the Sustainable Development Goals. Oh. I'm not sure it's moving. I have, unless there's a delay. So what UNEP has done, as they fix this, but what UNEP has done over the past, or has produced in the past couple of months, is a report called Making Peace with Nature, which is a scientific blueprint to really tackle the climate, biodiversity, and pollution emergencies. And what this report actually this report actually comes from findings of 25 major global assessments, including the IPCC, the IPBES, GEO, the IRP, and many others. And it's been prepared by over 50 leading experts from over 30 countries from around the world, and it's based on the work of these experts and these many governments that have been involved in this assessment. So this report really is a synthesis of all of these assessments put together. But what the reports also indicated and demonstrated is that the environmental challenges have grown in number and severity since the 1972 Stockholm Conference for the Human Environment, and how it has combined into an environmental emergency. The report also goes a step further in terms of providing a blueprint, if I may, on the different activities that can be taken in tackling these environmental crises, whether it's climate change, biodiversity, or pollution. So what we're saying here is we're looking at transforming our relationship with nature, transforming humankind, and moving from transforming nature in itself. And if we look at the image that we've got over here on the right, if you look at the pink side, we see that over the last 50 years, trade has grown nearly tenfold, the global economy has grown nearly fivefold, and the world population has doubled to 7.8 billion people. Of course, with that, average prosperity has clearly, doubled. But there still remains 1.3 billion people that live in poverty and 700 million people that are still hungry. Usually we measure economic growth using the GDP, but what GDP does not capture is natural capital, and we've heard that being said already today. And it doesn't capture neither social nor even human capital either. And so what we're seeing is an unequal, resource-intensive development model that is degrading and surpassing the Earth's capacity in sustaining human well-being. So what we're saying is we need to move and restore that capacity and adapt to it. And of course, the coming decade is very crucial as we try to achieve that. We see also that humans dominate the Earth almost entirely. We constitute about 1/3 of the combined biomass of mammals on Earth, livestock nearly 2/3, and wild mammals from mice to whales now amount to less than 5%. What we also see is that there's an increase of extraction of our natural resources. Energy has tripled over the past 50 years, and a lot of it is attributed to the growth of fossil fuels, from oil, coal, and gas. And so 2/3 of the warming that we see in the world is due to greenhouse gas emissions and due to carbon dioxide, mostly originating from these fossil fuels, but also from other renewables, hydropower. If you look at the image on the right, where it's illustrated, we see hydropower, nuclear, and other renewables as well. And that only illustrates our dependence on fossil fuels. If we look at the production and release of chemicals, we also see that is increasing at a fast pace. We see our use of fertilizers and its use in our natural ecosystems increasing, pesticide use, chemical industry outputs, but also we see a lot of marine plastic pollution, which has grown nearly tenfold since 1980. We also see greenhouse gas emissions on the increase, and that also means that the Earth's near mean temperature rise is increasing, has increased to more than 1 degree compared to previous periods. And we know that has already caused changes in precipitation patterns, but also in the melting of ice sheets, glaciers, as well as sea level rise, which is of course a threat to people and to nature. The risks associated with climate change are more severe now than they were previously thought. On the top left hand corner, there is a comparison of the climate change risk threshold levels that came out of the IPCC report. And if anything, and you see that the risks increase from yellow to red to purple. And so what we realize with smaller changes in temperature, the impact is actually quite significant. What we also know is that humanity has a major impact on 3/4 of the land and 2/3 of the ocean. This figure that's on the right actually shows the screen is really small here, but it really shows our global ice-free land surface. And this figure is actually came out in the IPCC land report. And so what we know is that 1/4 of global warming results from activities are related to land use. Quarter land has been radically transformed into different crop concentrations. Remaining near natural land is projected to be only 10% by 2050 if we continue on the path that we're on today. Moving on to biodiversity, it is declining at an alarming rate. The latest IPBES report actually indicated that 1 million of the world's estimated 8 million plants and species are threatened with extinctions. We see ecosystems being degraded, and we see our ecosystem services eroding. The graph that I've got, the diagram that you see below is actually the relative global impact of direct drivers on our major ecosystems. And if you see in purple, the major impact is land and sea use change, followed by pink direct exploitation, and then in yellow climate change, blue pollution, green pollution, and blue invasive alien species, which is actually quite dramatic, as you can see. Our progress towards the Aichi targets, or our biodiversity targets, and these targets are actually provided in the second column, and they range anywhere from awareness to indigenous local knowledge, biodiversity science, and financial resource. And so these two have been assessed by two different assessments: the IPBES global assessment and the global biodiversity outlook. And both assessments came out with very similar results. You see a lot of red. And what that actually means is that we are far from achieving these biodiversity targets. What you see in green is what we have somehow achieved, but you see a lot of them that we are so far from achieving. And what that means is there's still a lot of work to be done. In moving to discuss the relationships between these environmental emergencies, what we see is that they're very much intertwined. When we're looking at the relationship or discussing climate change and biodiversity, or looking at it from looking at land degradation and deforestation, what we see is that they give feedback to one another. So where you have land degradation, deforestation actually leads to greenhouse gas emissions, increased drought, loss of carbon sinks, and likewise climate change causes more biome shifts, regional desertification, increased drought, fire, and regional water stress. Similarly with biodiversity, biodiversity loss, of course, leads to reduced terrestrial carbon stocks, loss of carbon sinks, but climate change as well affects biodiversity loss through species range loss, extinction risks, ocean acidification, and mismatch of our phenological systems. Sorry. So what we see, so what this shows is how they are actually intertwined and how they are connected and how they should be addressed together in order for us to achieve sustainability. But we're also looking at the international environmental agreements that need to be aligned and become more mutually supportive. All right. So what does that mean in relation to the, there we go, to the SDGs? What we can see, of course, is a very similar diagram to what Baron just shared in terms of how the SDGs are all connected. What we see is a natural resource base that's really captured in SDG 13, 15, and 14. And what that actually does is hamper and affect the second tier that's available right here in terms of the efforts that communities are taking in terms of sustainability, and it also weakens the ability of people in terms of achieving food and water security. And this is, of course, through the different SDGs and sustainable consumption and production patterns and the other SDGs. And what that second ring then therefore hampers is, of course, the angle of the human angle, which is the elimination of poverty, reduction of inequalities, and also threatening human health. What we've seen in 2018 is that damages from climate-related natural disasters have actually cost $155 billion. And worldwide, 3.2 billion people are adversely affected by land degradation. And pollution has caused nearly 9 million premature deaths annually, primarily from indoor and outdoor pollution. And so very clearly, we have a challenge ahead of us. We are talking about transforming our relationship with nature is the key to sustainability. What is it that we need? We need human knowledge, ingenuity, technology, and most importantly, cooperation to transform these societies and economies and secure a sustainable future. This transformation, of course, will involve a fundamental shift and change of our technological, economical, and social organization of our societies, including our worldviews, our norms, our values, and more importantly, our governance structures. We can already see major shifts of investments happening to more sustainable investments. But what that ultimately needs is better regulation. The COVID-19 pandemic has also pushed us to accelerate that kind of transformation. We recognize more now, like Dr. Osama said, we recognize now more than ever the relationship between humans and the environment. And so if anything, this is a message that all of our environmental emergencies are connected and it should be addressed together for sustainability. What this also means is that we need to align our actions for protecting and restoring life on Earth. There's not one action on its own. It is the ensemble of all these actions together that will help us in transforming that relationship. We know conservation is absolutely critical. Restoration is absolutely critical as well to restore our degraded lands. Climate action, unless we come to grips with climate action and climate change, it could become the biggest driver to our loss of nature. We need to go back to these drivers. We need to look at pollution, our sustainable consumption production. We need all of these, invasive alien species as well. We need all of these if we are to transform our relationship with nature. And so very critical, what we need is a transformation of our economic, financial, and productive systems. What we're looking at, like we said, GDP covers economic growth, but does not cover sustainable economic growth. And so what we're looking at is really looking at our integrating natural capital into our decision making, and really looking at inclusive wealth. What we're also saying is that we need to internalize our externalities into goods and services, and really incorporate these into a circular economy. What we need is to change our financing, our institutions, our banks, and shift funding from towards a low carbon economy, and invest really in nature. Clearly, we have to recognize again that all of these systems are interchangeable. We cannot be looking at agriculture without looking at water and looking at food and energy, and vice versa. And so we're looking at national and international levels to work together. So keeping the planet healthy is key to providing health and well-being for all, which of course leads us to the issue of today. We know about 75% of all new infectious diseases have their origin in animals. 700,000 potential viruses in animals and birds could pose a threat to human health, and the risks of future zoonotic pandemics could be reduced by managing human activities and applying a holistic One Health approach. The image on the right actually shows how that system works. The bottom line, like I said, we need to transform our relationship with livestock, with wild animals, and have more hygienic wet markets. And lastly, what will it take? It will take all of us. We need everybody to act. We need our governments to act. They play a key role. They can transform the way we think of our economic and our financial systems. They can put the legislation in place to stimulate private sector and to stimulate our finance organizations, our pension funds, to also consider that shift into sustainable investments and more sustainable actions. We need our civil society organizations to help in increase in raising awareness, but it also needs us as individuals. We play a role in terms of in terms of our consumption habits, in terms of what we consume, in terms of what we waste from energy, food, and from water. And of course, it takes the scientific community to also help us in providing us with the knowledge and the information to make better evidence-based policies. Clearly, it's a very optimistic view, but we think that, together, and looking that we've got COP15 coming up this year, COP26 as well, I think if anything, it is actually an opportunity for us to really harmonize those goals and those targets and really have stronger actions towards them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Itaf, for your presentation. Now we will hear more about the importance of coral reef protection from Dr. Rikul, the Coral Ecologist Associate at KAUST.
celebrating Earth Day and okay, thank you. To be celebrating Earth Day and actually my own birthday today, as a passionate, thank you, as a passionate and for corals and fighting for their protection. I couldn't think of a better way to celebrate it, both Earth Day and my birthday. And I will try to talk a little bit about the importance of coral reefs and perhaps give everyone some hope or discuss ways for us to move forward and try to protect them. So first of all, why do we need coral reefs and why are they so important? So coral reefs are some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world, and they've been compared to forests, to rainforests, as per their diversity, being called the rainforest of the sea. And they provide a lot of food. They provide about food for about 1 billion people worldwide, and they of course support fisheries and respond for about actually 32% of the marine organisms. The most recent research has indicated that it's about 32%. It might be, and this is considering the species that we know. And this is only a fraction of the real diversity, so it is actually way more. And of course, this has a huge economic impact, and also in medicine. We know now that, for example, the screening for drugs from coral reefs is about 400% higher than the screening and the actually that we obtain from land, from these surveying lands. Is that going? And of course, the coral reefs are responsible for the protection of our coastline and also have a huge climate, but especially the protection against storms, tsunamis, hurricanes, and healthy reefs actually protect the coast and minimize the waves, minimize the energy that comes with the waves, and it's just to wait a little bit because I now see Neil, some patient, and I think Paul will be much better suited for this one. So let's think about coral reefs then. We have the coast and we have the waves, and they come and they approach the coast, but then they find this structure, this wall that actually dissipates the energy. And this is more or less how healthy corals can protect us against the energy of these waves, of storms, of the tsunamis and other impacts. So it's been estimated that millions of people would suffer every year without coral reefs, and flooding and etc. that would start to happen in a world without coral reefs. I think I need the images now. I'm trying to improvise. 1% of the population. I'm increasing the effect. Sorry, I've got like confused with the presentation. So, as I said, more than 32% of the known species seem to rely on the coral reefs, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is custodian to some of the most resilient, the most preserved coral reefs in the world. And why is this so important? Because now we are trying to understand the mechanisms, the traits that make these reefs so resilient. So if we learn from that, we can try to use it, we can try to manipulate, we can try to apply it in other reefs, and here as well, because all reefs are threatened. And although our reefs here are a little bit more resilient, they are still sensitive, and we saw this last year with the last bleaching event that happened here too, and we still see some dead corals and some bleached corals in the field. So we have the most, for now, the most resilient reefs, and they have traits that are so specific that have evolved with them because our reefs here are warmer, because of the salinity and all the extreme conditions that provided this opportunity for these reefs to evolve and have these traits that allow them to grow and to thrive in such challenging environments. So how do they do that? This is a treasure. We need to unlock it, understand it, and maybe apply it in other places and increase it here, enhance it here, so that we can protect our reefs in Saudi Arabia. And why should we worry? Of course, we've been talking about the importance, that they've been threatened, and what are the numbers? What is the urgency about it? So at least 50% we lost in the last, since the 70s, we lost about 50% of the living corals in our planet. So it's gone, we lost it, we cannot recover it anymore. The oceans have been way warmer. So if we compare the last about 30 years with the previous 30 years, we have an increase in 550% in the temperature of the seawater. This is a huge increase in a very short period of time. So that means that we have more heating events happening back to back, and so we don't give time for these organisms to adapt. It's too fast for them to adapt, so they end up dying. We have also numbers indicating that about 95% of the coral reefs around the world have severely bleached at least once since the 1980s. And most of the reefs will suffer annual severe bleaching by 2034 from now, even if we stop all the CO2 emissions right now. So that means we are running out of time, right? So we have a very, very narrow window that is about to close, and we have to do something now because the numbers show us that we've lost 50%, and we are about to lose the other 50% in the next 30 years. And why are they dying? Why is temperature affecting them? And what else is affecting them? So there are several different threats that are actually challenging these ecosystems. So we have the local threats, overfishing, eventually pollution, oil spills, for example, sewage or other impacts that we can find locally. But the most important ones are the global threats. Right, overfishing can also be included here, and the CO2 emissions and increased seawater temperature. So when we have it, especially these threats, we have especially the emissions, we compromise the reefs, we compromise the health of these organisms, and then we lose most of the functions that these ecosystems have to provide. But why these organisms bleach due to temperature or these impacts? So coral reefs are holobionts. That means that they are organisms that live in close association with microbes living within them. So they rely on these microbes. Most specifically, one of the most important of these interactions, this symbiotic interaction, happens with the photosynthetic algae that lives within these organisms. This photosynthetic algae gives about 80% of the energy that shallow coral reefs need, most of them. And the problem is that once the temperature of the water starts to increase, these algae in the coral, there is a dysbiotic process, a breakdown of the good relationship that they have, because they start to increase the production of toxic compounds because they get stressed. The photosynthetic apparatus of these algae gets stressed, they start to produce these toxic compounds, and this is bad for all of them, corals and algae. So the algae leaves or is expelled from the corals, and the corals lose 80% of the energy input. The coral is still not dead at this point. They can actually recover this algae if the temperature gets back to normal, but the coral is very, very, very challenged. It is about to die. And they bleach because the algae also has most of the pigments that give them the colors that they have. And this is why we see them bleaching when the algae leaves. Is it irreversible? We know that we can reverse the bleaching process, but the threats and all these problems and the decline of coral reef cover, is that irreversible? What can we do? So as I said, there is a very narrow closing, a window that is closing right now, and so we have about 10 years maximum to actually do something about it. And of course, the most important thing is to reduce greenhouse gas emission, and we've been talking about this during the presentation. And if we compare again with COVID, we have a challenging goal that is reducing the CO2 emissions, but at the same time, we have to look it through different lenses. So when we think about COVID, it has been affecting our lives, killing sisters and brothers, separating families, messing up our lives, and we are not being able to actually have the normal life that we had before. And because of that, because it affects our lives, our daily lives, we had to act, right, immediately. So we brought the scientists, we put all the efforts that we had to create vaccine, to have a cure, to actually go back to our normal lives, to get our lives back, and actually, of course, to protect human life. And we did that relatively quickly, right? Because we had like a completely different lifestyle that everyone could feel. When we talk about the environment and biodiversity loss, as we have discussed before, and because we are disconnected from nature, we don't see it. We don't get to see it in our daily lives. We don't get to see corals bleaching. We don't get to see bees dying, amphibians, all the organisms that we are losing worldwide. But the problem is that the silent pandemic, it's going to be as catastrophic as COVID pandemic. The difference is that there is no vaccine for that. Once it's gone, it's gone. There's nothing we can do, right? And in this case, we have to act before it happens. We cannot wait. So it is challenging, but it's urgent. And if we manage to do this, to have the entire world working together to get a cure, to get a vaccine, we can do it again if we realize how important it is and how catastrophic the impacts will be. So improve local conditions, it's of course important because global and local impacts affect coral reefs, and active intervention is actually necessary now. So even if you don't do anything, even if we stop now living, we don't have any CO2 emissions, we already have a committed amount of CO2 that is actually going to cause coral bleaching, severe coral bleaching for the next decade. So we need to do something else. We need to help accelerating this corals adaptation to the new conditions, to the new world that we have now. We have to rebuild coral life. In this scenario, and here I would like to praise the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Dr. Osama for leadership, for bringing the G20 here to build this platform to accelerate research in this case for coral reefs, the development of research that can actually provide the tools and technology that we need to accelerate the adaptation of corals. This is actually a gift to the humanity because it's something we need and it's urgent. And of course, KAUST, it's very proud to be the host for the node that is going to help accelerate the central node that is actually going to help this platform of acceleration of accelerated research. And the thing here that is very important to say is that, and this is interesting because I have recently arrived in Saudi Arabia. I was living in the US until last year, and we had to make a decision as a family at the time. We had my husband and I had the job opportunity there in the US. Our kids were adapted, but then we came to KAUST, and we got to see the Red Sea, and we got to imagine and think about the treasures for us researchers to unlock and to use. But most importantly, we've got to see the commitment of this country with these new directions of moving towards the more sustainable way of life, of moving it, the Giga projects, Vision 2030. And I think that this is super important to be highlighted because this is actually what we need. We researchers, we can't do research, we can't provide anything, we can deliver the results if we don't have support. And in this case, we need governmental support. The university, KAUST, is actually providing us with everything we need to actually develop the most ambitious, the most relevant research that can be done in this regard. So, this is to say that to protect or to give them a chance to help corals to adapt to this challenging world, we need to take some decisions. We need to make some decisions, and we need to take some steps. We need to develop some customized, evidence-driven action. So we need to use the tools that we have, but we need to understand each ecosystem. We know that coral reefs are very complex ecosystems. We know that they have thousands of organisms living in there, and each reef will be different from the other one depending on the region. So for every and each of these reefs, we have to first understand the dynamics, look at the ecosystem, and kind of provide a diagnosis, a local diagnosis that can then indicate the best tools that we have. Most of the tools we have nowadays are experimental, so they are all ambitious solutions that researchers have tested in lab trials or in small pilot experiments, and now we are right at the point where we need to give the next step. We need to actually try to start implementing it, testing it, deploying it, because it's time, while we still have them, right? So what we need to do is that we need to go to the reef, understand the dynamics, the diversity, the threats, the impacts for that reef, and then we can come up with different solutions from the toolbox that we have. For example, there are different, in KAUST, for example, there are different researchers developing some of these tools. We can select the most resistant corals from the reef and try to reproduce them in the lab. And then by doing that, we can create coral gardens and we can restore these ecosystems with the most resilient colonies that are naturally found in the reef. So when the reef is bleaching, we always find some colonies from the same coral species that don't bleach, and they are more resilient. So we can try to bring them to the lab, we can try to reproduce them, and we can try to breed them and create even more resilient colonies. We can also force this adaptation. We can submit them to stress and see whether they get more resilient, and then we can also do the same process. We can also use some other types of environmental manipulation, like shading and even cooling in some cases. And most importantly, we can try to restore these corals, these reefs, with corals that we grow and then bring back to the reef. The problem is that if we do that, we need to be careful because we need to try to do this with colonies that will resist the next bleaching event. Otherwise, we will be spending time and efforts to replace colonies that will die after the first heat stress. And for that, there are also some opportunities and some research being developed. For example, we have the selective breeding and the development of probiotics, which is the research that I have started with my group, where we try to use the microorganisms living within corals. Remember that we have the algae, and they are super important for the corals, but other microorganisms living within corals are also important, and they provide health to the algae and the coral itself. So if we could replace or give good bacteria for them, we can try to buffer this breakdown, this symbiotic breakdown, and keep these microbes there, these algae there. So in this case, and this is an article that came out yesterday at Scientific America talking about the research that we are doing here and the research that we are planning to do here in KAUST. And I read some words that I heard from Paul today. I heard innovative, I heard leadership, I heard ambitious as well. And I thought, oh, well, I think we are at the right place and doing the right thing. Because as I explained you, we have corals living in association with these organisms, and it's just like us. So humans, we can have even more microbial cells in our body than human cells. So we rely on the microorganisms that live within us. And we rely on the microorganisms that shape the planet as we know it, right? And it's the same for corals. So the corals depend on these microorganisms that give them nutrients, that protect them against pathogens, that give them compounds that they cannot get by themselves. And they also help the algae and interact with the algae in a way that the algae is going to be more resilient if they can mitigate the toxic compounds that are produced when the seawater temperature increases. So our idea was to do more or less as we do for humans. When we are sick and we are going to take antibiotics, and our doctor tells us to have yogurt of probiotics to make our body stronger. So we thought that we could do the same for corals, because once the corals are affected by any stress and they start the process of bleaching, not only the algae leaves, but the good bacteria that also live in harmony with the corals, they also leave. So we thought that we should mitigate this problem, and by increasing the numbers of good bacteria. So these good bacteria are also sensitive to stress, they leave or they die, and what we are doing is that we are using local bacteria from the reef associated with the corals, but that the good ones that are sensitive. And of course, when we talk about bacteria, people get scared, right? Because they don't know, they don't see, and they always associate it with disease. And so some people get concerned, wow, but you're going to put bacteria in the ocean, what if they affect other organisms? What if they are pathogenic? The thing is that we, of course, run a very strict trial in the lab, a risk assessment to make sure we are only retrieving the good bacteria, the beneficial ones that are very common in the marine environment. So we are not putting anything new there. We are rebooting the microbiome, as my colleague Chris Vostra mentioned today in the Twitter. We are rebooting the damaged system. So we are making sure that the good ones will be there and the bad ones, the pathogenic bacteria, won't overgrow. And this is the risk, because when we are talking about intervention for coral reefs, we are talking about taking the risk, because the risk of inaction can be higher than the risk of doing something, right? If we don't do anything, the sick corals will become petri dishes for the reproduction, evolution of pathogens, because pathogens like the damaged environment. And this is the risk. These bacteria can then spread and cause problems. So, okay, this is an elimination. The strategy, very briefly, we get the corals, we isolate beneficial bacteria from them, we do the screening in the lab to make sure that they are beneficial. We combine several different mechanisms, beneficial mechanisms, and then we give them back to corals. Once we do that, we can use it in different stages. We can do this as bioremediation approach. So the corals are bleached or sick. We go to the reef, we give the bacteria, we expect this to stop, we expect the algae to return. We can also use it as a prevention tool, so we know when corals are going to bleach and where from no alerts. So we go there before the bleaching event, we start giving the probiotics as we do in the case of humans before we take antibiotics, and then we expect the reefs to be more resilient. So if you're stronger, if you are healthier, you will resist disease better, right? It's the same for corals. And we can use this in association with gardening, which is the reproduction of corals in tanks or even in situ. Then we can give the probiotics and make them more resilient. And then when we bring them back to the reef, we make sure that they won't die in the next heat event. We did some tests with the probiotics in the lab, so we came up with this idea and the outline for this type of tailored research in 2016, more or less, 2015. Then we started to do the trials, and we managed to do this with several different coral species. And I'm giving one example. In one of the trials, we had all the corals bleaching, even with the probiotics, but after we decreased the temperature, so we reproduced the thermal event. After we decreased the temperature, all of the corals treated with probiotics survived, and while 40% of the corals that were treated with placebo died. And we tracked the mechanisms, the molecular mechanisms, and we've been improving it and increasing the number of colonies that we've been treating with probiotics. We've been doing different approaches and combined approaches where we can protect more than one species, and we've been testing it in different labs in different places in collaboration with other researchers in the world to make sure that this is going to be reproducible in other reefs. Okay. So going back to the beginning of the presentation, we are talking about One Health, the One Health concept. We think that coral reefs are a very important part of this One Health. So when we think about healthy environments, we have to think about coral reefs because of the importance of these ecosystems for most of the organisms in marine ecosystems, and of course with their connections with terrestrial ones. But we also think that we can start to think out of the box. So when we think about coral reef restoration, that I like to call rehabilitation, because we don't want them to be the same, we want them to be adapted. I'm starting to think about whole reef restoration, and this is what my colleagues at CAUS and other colleagues in our international network have been trying to do, that we've been trying to understand the connectivity between these species in the reef, not only corals, but sponges and fish, algae, other organisms that are living there, how the microbes connect them all, and how can we manipulate the health of corals through the use of coral probiotics, and by doing so, we also improve the health of all other organisms in the reef. And so we are talking about coral reef rehabilitation, not only coral rehabilitation. With that, I thank you very much, and I would only like to add something. I would like to thank Professor Carlos Duarte for some input in this presentation, again to the Minister and CAUS, and I think we can have some hope, but we really need to act really quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rakul. Last but not least, the Chief Technical Advisor at FAO, Dr. Jerma, will take the floor and present international organizations' efforts to protect the Earth.
Thank you. I come with my computer just in case of any problem. My colleagues from UNEP told me that the screen is very tiny. So how do I go? How do I go to the next screen? Very nice presentations, actually very interesting and very motivating to listen to the different presentations. So a lot of research work. Now we come back to development. We were lucky to have a lot of research work going on today. So we speak a little bit about development. If we have been requested to speak about source. Yeah. So sorry, can I get full screen because it's already too big. Just want only one screen. Just one screen. I do it like this. Sorry, the screen is a little bit small. But thank you everyone for this opportunity to be here. And if you remember the statements that Dr. Osama has brought in the beginning, really very good. And thank you so much to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for this ambition, and also really for taking this to heart, not by talk, but by action. I would not like to repeat anything that he said, that actually it was a challenge for the Undersecretary speaking about changing our minds, not really doing research or doing things. So very quickly, and I would like to, I don't want to repeat many things because many of the things that I would like to mention here have been mentioned before. So the unhealthy state of the earth ecosystems, already many of the speakers already spoke about them. And also the connection between taking care of the earth and sustainability and sustainable development. Again, also many of speakers before already mentioning that, and also even indicating that this is connected to all the SDGs, but maybe to some more closely or very directly to a number of the people and planet SDGs. This challenge, we were requested to look at what is the role of international organizations. But I think that this question can even be rephrased. What is our role, all of us? And because I think it is all of us, what can we do to protect the earth? And when we were requested to do this within a short time, one of the things that we did was to start to think how we can present this. And one of the things that what we have done quickly was really to group the different actions that can be taken. So starting with the support for policy and the framework for action, international organizations and all of us in different ways can take different actions within that space there, including the UN programs and agencies, but also the United Nations Economic Commissions and other international organizations. There is the space for support to legislation, treaties, and conventions. Again, also there are quite a lot of things that can be done, and that are being done by different international organizations. And going to the implementation of action, when we work within the UN system, we know that a lot of work is also going on with the international NGOs, many of them doing a lot of good work like IUCN and everyone else. I cannot speak about any one of them. A lot of good work is being done by everyone, like also the work that we have already seen now from CAST. So there is a lot of work that can also be done in terms of implementing and doing different things on the ground. And then there is the funding support in many different ways. And then also we have the international organizations supporting research and the creation of knowledge, tools, systems, and these kind of things. So actually, when you think about what is happening down there, you realize that this is a very dynamic system. And actually, it presents challenges because, as you can see, a lot of work that is being done by one organization is also being done by another organization. We need to see how we can leverage each other. We need to see how we can work together. It also presents those many opportunities because the different organizations and the different agencies and the different actors have different kind of capacity. So going forward in the rest of this presentation, what we have done is really to look at an example of FAO to demonstrate what we think the role of international organizations in protecting the earth. I don't want to go to the details about what FAO does there. I would like just maybe to mention some of the things that we, international organizations, not only FAO, could do to protect the earth. So one of the major areas is to drive the policy dialogue. So international organizations are poised in a very good way to drive forward the policy dialogue. For example, within FAO, in the different conferences, commissions, and committees that FAO is leading, there is opportunity there by the international organizations to drive policy dialogue. The other area that international organizations can put a key role is in terms of developing partnerships. And not only partnerships between international organizations, but also helping countries also build partnerships. So also, as an example with FAO, quite a number of work there going on the partnership, and some global big partnerships like the soil partnership or the mountain partnership. International organizations also can play a key role in building the capacity at different levels. So again, also there, without going into details, we can build capacity in terms of developing the skills. We can build capacity in terms of building organizations. We can build capacity in terms of creating the enabling environment. So again, also international organizations have a key role to build the capacity, but also another area there is in terms of implementing programs in the field. And again, also here as examples from FAO, but also all other different international organizations can make a key contribution in the implementation of different programs. But also lastly, in the area of building tools and systems, especially for assessments, but also for being able to quantify what already has been done and what are the areas where actions need to take place. Another aspect of, another area just also to highlight here is the opportunity for international organizations to work together. For example, recently between FAO, UNEP, and the UN Economic Commission, a new decade, the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration that was briefly mentioned before, but also which provides a big opportunity. The theory for change for the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration is that restoration of the ecosystem is necessary to move away from the direction that has been demonstrated here today by the different speakers, and that nature-based solutions provides almost a third of the solutions that we need to address these problems that have been very clearly demonstrated today. And that also, when we rehabilitate and build the ecosystem, the productive landscape and seascapes, including the coral reefs, also provide the potential for jobs, and also ensuring food, energy, water security, livelihoods, and also health. Again, also, the theory for change for the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration is that also, despite the fact that, as has been said here today, the restoration is expensive, there is also a lot of economic value for restoration. The decade has got 10 action areas, and these action areas present a good opportunity for international organizations to work together towards a common goal of protecting the earth. I would like to go in the same direction now here, showing how international organizations can also work at a regional and national country level to support the protection of the earth. And already was mentioned before, so I don't get into any details, the Middle East Green Initiative, and also the very ambitious Saudi Green Initiative that was even brought forward by the Undersecretary in the beginning of the meeting. So here, international organizations also are very strategically placed to support the region and also the countries in the region here with these two very ambitious initiatives that have been put forward. In the kingdom here, FAO has a huge package of work, and we'd like to appreciate the support that has been provided by the Ministry of Environment, Water and Agriculture. And this, again, also I'm using it as an example to demonstrate how international organizations can work with countries to help them realize their visions and their development agenda. So this, for example, is the Rural Development Program of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where FAO has got 9 work packages that cut across a wide range of natural resource related enterprises, coming from the beekeeping to coffee production to rose flower to fisheries to livestock, and underpinning all of these sustainable management of natural resources and the protection of the environment. I don't want to get into more details here, just to say the importance actually for the collaboration or the partnership between the international organization and the countries. Because, for example, here we have had a very good partnership between the Ministry of Environment and FAO, allowing us over the last 3 years to craft a program that is very comprehensive and that are cut across the integrations and the necessary linkages that we have been spoken about in the beginning, including like by Baron. So it's until there is that possibility of working very closely together between the international organizations or between the development or the research organization with the country that you can get to that possibility of working together to come to a point where you are able to develop such a program. Here, within the big program of rural development, we are working in one of the areas that is directly linked to the Undersecretariat for Environment. And here, what this line shows the linkage between the work that FAO is doing and the work that the National Center for Vegetation Cover, one of the 5 centers that were mentioned by Dr. Osama in the beginning. And the brew resorts here, we have about 22 of them. The brew resorts are looking at developing technologies and innovations, cutting across a wide range of spectrum, with piloting, testing what is working, and identifying those which are successful, and then helping the government to scale those up. The orange one are mainly actions or resorts that are for creating capacity, both for the ministry but also the stakeholders within the natural resource and the environment domain. And the red ones are resorts that will build data, information systems, and knowledge management within natural resource and environment protection. And again, here the point is the need for the international organization to align their work and mainstream whatever that work they are doing to the agenda and the priorities that have been set. For example, here are the 7 strategic objectives of the Saudi National Center for Vegetation Cover and Development. This is the last slide for my presentation. And here, we just like to pose some thoughts for international organizations to improve the work that we are doing, and especially working together with the countries. One of the things that we would like to highlight here, which is not a new thing, is that the challenges that are facing the Earth, all the Earth ecosystems, most of these are actually cut across the boundaries. They are transboundary, and they will require a possibility to be able to collaborate across the boundary, even within a country. Like here in Saudi Arabia, you will find an issue that you are dealing with cuts across a number of governorates, and the need then to work together with the different authorities. In many cases, national and regional constraints and conflicts sometimes make this quite challenging, and it is necessary to take that on board. Also, as has been already demonstrated by many reports, although a large volume of knowledge has been gained and technologies and tools developed, we continue to know that, and we continue to witness very slow progress in terms of protecting the Earth ecosystems, especially at the country level, And it is then necessary that any lessons that already have been learned, where we are sure that this is working or this is an approach that has made a difference, is then shared and as soon as possible. Also, we would like to also propose here that actions undertaken to rehabilitate earth ecosystems need to ensure environmental and social safeguards, which is always the case and always said in all the documents or in all the arguments, but the implementation of the same is usually not always the case. Also, international organizations can make a lot of progress by working together and coordinating their actions at different levels, at the global, regional levels, and that happens a lot, but also at the country level, as we are doing now with our work together with UNEP, to be able to leverage the unique capabilities of the different international organizations. Also, we would like to mention that the full gender inclusion and youth engagement is important, and especially there is a big opportunity by making use of the emerging digital technologies. We also like to note that natural disasters and shocks, like has already been mentioned before here, the COVID pandemic, will also going to affect our progress, and it is important that we plan for the same, but also that this provides us opportunity to think of our actions and also to see what we can do better right in the beginning. Thank you so much, and I appreciate to be part of the seminar.
Thank you, Dr. Germa. On behalf of Ministry Environment, Water and Agriculture, I would like to thank our speakers during the seminar for their valuable contribution. In conclusion, if you are thinking about the environment, take action on Earth Day and let us all come to the hard work of restoring our planet and making peace with nature. Happy Earth Day.